Okay. Oh, got it.
You got that? Yeah, we're in English because sort of like my career, if I may call it that, is based on, making music and art for the English-speaking countries.
Yeah, and my career, if you can call it that, what's left of it, is also in English. Yeah.
Yes. But you do speak German.
Yeah, I speak German. The trouble is, I mean, I came to Germany in '94, and I'd had about a month of lessons when I realized I was going to be moving to Germany. It was absolutely, I mean, I don't know, it was so futile. You can imagine it. I had this paid for by MTV, I'd like to say, who didn't know I was leaving. So this guy called Stefan, a really great guy who was teaching me German, I could tell he was extremely frustrated because, I was probably the worst student he'd ever had. And also because I was so busy at the time, it was, hardly possible really to do even 1 or 2 hours German a day. And then, when I came to Germany, obviously I was thrown in to the deep end immediately. Actually, something like 4 days after I started, after only being able to say Scheiße. I think that was really probably the only word that I really could say. I had to go to Dusseldorf to this, I don't know, in this hotel was some sort of event. And I was on stage and asked to speak, and I spoke English. And this guy kept shouting out, "Speaking German, you live in Germany." And I just went, "I've been here 4 fucking days. Like, give me a break." So, and then at Viva, I mean, it was really difficult. And basically, it wasn't until 2 years in, after I'd been fired from Viva and my whole life changed, and I started to make real friends in Germany, friends that would stay around for a long time. Then the whole thing changed again, and I started to go to German lessons, and I started to pick up German. And and then it changed again when I went back to university in 2006 and I studied screenwriting. I went back to the UK on and off for a year to do this master's course. And eventually when I came back, I mean, I had a flat here and I was coming backwards and forwards. But eventually when I came back and I really started writing, I realized that when I wrote in English, I was writing like a German wrote English. So I could, because at that point I could neither speak German or English and certainly couldn't write either. So I made a conscious decision in the last few years, because I really concentrated on screenwriting in the last few years, to live as much as possible in English, but with my German friends who I met in German. There's some I met in English, as it were, but the ones that I met in German, I speak German to. The ones I met in English, I speak English to. And a lot of communication I do in English because I just have to, because otherwise my writing, and I've actually had this in meetings with Americans where they ask me, "Oh, your English is really good for a German." And then it gets really embarrassing. So I've sort of concentrated on that. And because I live in this bubble world of Zoom, that basically is my world these days, that I don't feel that I need to, I'm not going on stage, and I'm not doing interviews in German, and I'm not really doing a lot of appearances, if any. So for me, it's quite comforting that I can speak German when I want to, pretty badly, and English I have to also pretty badly still.
Has speaking German changed you?
Well, I think Germany changed me. I mean, I
Okay.
think that's the real point. It's when you move to another country, you have a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror. And it's because there are differences between your home country and the country that you move to, you suddenly get a reflection of yourself. And there were quite a few things I didn't like about myself. Not that I'm some sort of perfect individual today, but there were certain things that I didn't like about myself. And I thought that it was a very powerful experience, and it changed me. And I think because the German language is quite direct, that I started to adopt that direct manner when I go to England. So, you know, like when the coffee comes, and in England, it's always more in the saucer than in the cup, and I'm sending it back. Or if I get food I don't like, I'm sending it back, and everyone hates me. Or, you know, I don't know, there are just certain aspects which are very different in the directness. I remember going to a supermarket one day, and the woman behind the till just said to me, "You've got fat." And it was like, hang on a minute, I don't know you. And I felt like saying, "You've always been fat," you know, like, but my Englishness held me back. But somehow in Germany, there is a much more directness. And when you get used to it, you sort of love it. But it is the country where I felt I changed in a way that I'm happy with. And so for me, that was a very, very important change. And I think it is something to do with the language, but it's more to do with the whole culture.
Yeah, you know, I used to live in Austria. I was there for 10 years. And even though you would assume they speak German, you know, or some kind of German, but it's completely different. Like you say, like they are never direct. Like you're not allowed to say no. You say something durch die Blume, you know? So you kind of
Well,
have to
that's a
flower.
little bit English, isn't it? That's a
It
little bit
is.
English as well. You don't say, and also I remember, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, sex and sexuality has changed over the years completely. But you know, if you said to someone, "Oh, would you like to come back to mine for a coffee?" It didn't mean for a coffee. You know what I mean? It was like there was nothing said directly. And I remember being in a German nightclub in about 94, and this guy came up to me and said, "You want to come home for a fuck?" What? like it was, and I thought, God, this is really weird. This is too much. So it's the directness. Sometimes I don't know whether it's a change in societal change as well, but I do think Germans say it like they mean it, and they mean it. And when you get used to that, it's really good. I mean, look at Brexit. I think it's the greatest example of British people not understanding German mentality at all. When Angela Merkel said, you know, we don't compromise on this, this, and this, and the British were going, "Oh, what about this? You know, what about we could compromise." And it's like, no, hang on a minute. She said no, she means no, and she won't change her mind. Do you know what I mean? And British perspective is very different. And so those two parts of the culture don't really understand each other, I'd say. But when you've lived in a country a long time, then you get used to it, you understand it, and you need to speak the language to be in the culture. If you don't speak it, you're never actually going to get into the culture and meet people.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I mean, I live in Prenzlauer Berg here in Berlin, and there are a lot of people here that don't speak German. And I don't mind it, but I'm wondering like what they're missing out, you know?
Well, I never understand it in Berlin when you go to a cafe and they're either British or American who are serving you, and no one speaks German, and it does feel very odd, to be honest. But you know, I mean, I don't mind. It's like it's fine for me. But I understand that totally. I think there are just pockets of society which congregate. And I made a conscious decision when I came here that I would not be friends with any English people or any Americans. And basically, I mean, I can't say totally, but I don't have any sort of friends at the moment that are English or American. But I consciously do not mix with English people or Americans. I didn't for a long time because I felt if I did that, I would never speak German and I'd be resistant to understanding or being part of the culture. And I think that was a really good decision.
So before you actually came over to Germany, did you have what was your, if you had any opinion about Germany?
Well, I had lots of friends here because of MTV, basically. I mean, I must admit, in my youth, the first country that I visited from university was Germany. You know, I got train over to Cologne. It was actually Cologne. And a friend of mine was a presenter on BFBS, or radio host on BFBS. And she actually worked close with Tommy Vance in London. And we used to hang out with him, who's like this rock journalist. I don't know, he's very famous in England in, you know, in that period in the 80s. And so anyhow, I came over to visit her and hung out with her, and the FBS was somewhere near Cologne, and I can't even remember where it was. That's the weird thing. And so I came over here, and Cologne was the first city I came to. And when I worked for MTV, obviously Germany was an enormous territory for MTV, and the most important territory, I would say. And so we would come over here a lot to either interview artists or I don't know, do features or whatever. And I also then got hooked on The Omen and Dorian Gray in Frankfurt. And I spent about a year every weekend on a plane going over and getting shit-faced in those clubs and going completely nuts, which I can talk about now because it's so long in the past. And I'm such a healthy individual today. I have nothing to do with anything from the past in that way. But I used to go there and just go absolutely mad and just hang out with Mark Spoon, who passed, Sven Fate. Matthias Martinson, who ran Logic Records, was a friend of mine, and he was part owner of the Omen with Michael Munzing and Sven. And so it used to start. I used to land at the airport. Matthias would pick me up, and then it'd start slowly. So we'd go for dinner, have some nice dinner somewhere, and then sidle into the Omen. And then sometimes it would be basically the whole weekend. Or I don't know, actually, I do think I had a break at one point, but it was basically the whole weekend. I was in the Omen once. I think it was 26 hours, literally in a nightclub for 26 hours in one go. I mean, it's insane, really. If I think about it today, I couldn't manage 1 hour probably, I don't know. But anyhow, it was fun to do. And I did it. And in essence, I feel I can look back and say, well, in a way, I got away with it because now I'm very healthy and look after myself, and I don't regret any of that. It's just something that I did when I was young.
And so that means that it was kind of like the relationship you had with Germany kind of grew from that initial seed of going to Cologne.
Absolutely, it felt like a natural decision, and I really liked coming here. I mean, I just really. Like the people, well, the people I knew, you only know the people you know, obviously, but the people I knew were really nice and really open. I liked what I felt then, what I knew of the German mentality. I liked it, and I do feel that Germans are much more modern and forward-thinking than British people, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but there is a massive grouping of British people who are mainly old and white like myself, who are living a little bit in the past, but they live in the past. You know what I mean? They can live in the past. And that is why, that's why Brexit came about, essentially, in any case. But I think there's a whole grouping, obviously, and there was in my era, of people who are also forward-looking. So it was really nice to come here, and I really enjoyed it, and I like the people, and I like the openness, and it seemed like a natural change of life. I mean, there was another factor in the decision to leave, and that was, I felt, and this is an odd thing to say, but I felt being on camera was ruining my life. I look at fame as a disease. I think it should be seen as an illness, and it gives, if you're, my fame was minor, but if you get famous in some way, it's like a drug. You get this rush and you constantly need more, and it's like an attention deficit. And you'll find that most famous or successful people in the world have something lacking in their childhood that has led to this thing, because it's like a compensation from what you didn't have. I didn't have a father that really gave me any attention. He actually didn't want a third child, had nothing to do with me. And I think I sought out love from the whole world, as it were, by being on TV, or the world of TV, to compensate the fact that I didn't get love from my father. So I think there's always a reason behind people why they search for fame. And then you've got to go the truth is, what you've got to do is you've got to deal with it. And I've dealt with it since then in therapy and feel completely different about it. And for me, it's just something, you see it, you know, why do people go on those reality shows? Why do people are so desperate to be on television? I mean, there are certain things that are really horrendous, I think, on TV. There's some things that you can do that are okay, and they earn you money and it's fine. But I think that absolute obsession and need to get attention is really dangerous. And so for me, I feel like I've left that behind. And then the phone's going to ring and they're going to say, do you want to be on so-and-so? And I'd probably say yes. No, I don't know. It's yeah, I mean, I probably would. But the thing is, I do think once you feel that it's doing you no good and it's becoming some form of driving force in your life, it's very unhealthy and it shouldn't be. You have to find something, I think, that's more creatively worthwhile, or I don't know, socially worthwhile, or love, or whatever. And fame can't be the end all and be all in life. And I think for a lot of people it is.
Wow. Well, I think we're only like 10 minutes in, and I'm very happy that you're this direct and you're putting this on the table right away. It's kind of like
that's why I don't do interviews.
No, I'm totally with you with this. And you know what? Even though I don't have fame, but I experience that kind of thing, even on like a different levels where it's about just being on the road and playing every night. And like, it took me a while to understand that like the hormonal balance changes just being on stage, like focusing so hard, you know, on playing the right notes and stuff, and you know, like presenting something, being calm while everybody else is excited, right? And somehow it still takes me a long time. I just returned from a 5-week tour and I'm 3 weeks home now, and I'm still like totally feeling the withdrawal of
well,
that hormone,
Yeah.
And you know, it's
sorry, no, I think you've got it completely. I mean, that is it. It changes the functions of your body. And I mean, when I worked for MTV, I can't remember really a weekend where I was in Britain. There wasn't a weekend. I was on 2 or 3 planes a week. I was just flying around Europe, interviewing people or interviewing people in London. And my whole life was a constant rush. Now, obviously,
let me ask a stupid question. Why do you think was it that you were so popular as a presenter?
Oh, well, this is sort of, I mean, I have a great story to do with this, but I'll tell you in a second. But Ray Coates was the most popular presenter on MTV. He had an entertainment show, and I would go home and watch it. And I loved Ray in that period. I thought that was it fitted, and it was a really great show. And he is a very, very talented presenter. Now, I'm not, and I mean this sincerely, I'm not a talented presenter, and I'm not a usual presenter in any way, because I'm just me. You know, I don't really, I mean, all I did was read an autocue. I mean, this is, you know, I wrote the autocue because it was, you know, it's facts about pop stars or whatever. But all I did was read it, and I don't see that I had any great talent. I mean, I had imposter syndrome. There's no doubt about it. I didn't see that I had any great talent. I didn't think I was successful. And in fact, MTV, in the first period of MTV, they tried to fire me about 10 times for being gay. And they had a meeting before MTV started where I was called into, because I'd already said to my boss that I'm gay as we went out for lunch. And then I got called into this meeting, and the meeting was, can you be gay on MTV? And I was thinking, well, you know, it's not really my choice. I just am. And I think I said something like, well, I think that's God's decision, not mine, although I don't believe in God. But I think I said something like that. And then the press officer, who was an Austrian woman called Christine Gorham, married to Scott Gorham of Thin Lizzy, and she piped up because she could see this meeting was going in the wrong direction with these Americans. she said, everyone in Europe on television is gay. Terrible Austrian accent, but there we go. Everyone on television in Europe is gay. And the Americans just went, really? And she said, yes. And they went, oh, okay. And I kept my job. But then every time this reared its head, they were really furious about it. And it was a really difficult process. And eventually there was a meeting in Amsterdam of the heads of MTV America, met up with the heads of MTV Europe to discuss the channel one weekend. And when they came back from that meeting, and they didn't have any ratings at that time, when they came back from that meeting, they pulled me into the office, and I thought I was going to be fired because I knew it happened. And they said to me, oh, you're really popular. And I said, oh, right, okay. How do you know that? And this is great on so many levels, because they'd gone to a restaurant after this big meeting about where the channel should go and which presenters would stay and which would be moved or pushed out. And they went to this Brazilian restaurant, and the waiter overheard they were from MTV, and he asked them, and they said yes. And then they said, what presenter do you like? And he said, Steve Blame, he's my favorite. Now, a week after that, I went to Holland and I slept with my erstwhile boyfriend, who was that waiter. And he told me, so there is a God, and it's a God of gay karma. who I mean, it's so mad. So I survived because someone I slept with, thank God, I obviously am reasonably okay in bed. No. So anyhow, someone I slept with said that they liked me, and that was the reason that I survived. And then, of course, the world changed. You know, this got into the early 90s, and then they came to me in 92 and said, we want you to present a gay music show. And I said, oh, fuck off. I said, what's gay music? Am I going to play I Will Survive for like 20 hours? What am I going to do? I mean, it would be different today because it's, you know, there's much more identity politics, and it would make a sort of great idea. But back then, it made no sense at all. And also for me, music is music. I don't give a shit who makes it in that sense. It really is about whether, you know, you appreciate the music or you don't appreciate the music. And the idea of playing some sort of 70s gay disco would horrify me. So I said, no, I'm not doing that. And it ghettoizes stuff, you know, and I hate ghettoization in every way. We all live in this world, and somehow we all have to get on. I mean, I sound like a 5-year-old child when I say that, but it's true. I think that's the only things to say. Yeah. So that's my story about that. And I can't remember your exact question.
The question was if there was a moment when you realized that you were popular, and as you were saying, you were like the jet set of going to interviews every weekend. And
no, I don't know. I mean, popular, no, but you know, being recognized and being popular are two different things. And there was definitely a lot of moments of recognition which were quite extreme. And I think one of the most extreme ones for me was in Sweden. And I went out to a nightclub with the producer, and it was the opening night of this nightclub. And there were about 400 people waiting to get in. And they partied like for Moses, you know, like this whole crowd, like they saw us, and then suddenly they went quiet and partied. And I was going like, what's going on here? What's going on here? And we got into this club and it was packed, and they left a semicircle with quite a large area around us and just stood and watched. And it was incredibly uncomfortable until the moment where I just went sort of, come here. And then it went a bit mad. And I think there were so many situations where it was, for me, abnormal. But at the same time, I think you know, this is back to the fame aspect. I think I liked being stroked. I think I liked the fact that people recognize me. And I mean, they were always nice to me. No one was really ever mean to me. I can't remember anything like that. So basically, I just had a good time. And to be honest, you know, at that period of my life, it was like, right, free drinks, free drugs, you know, let's go mad. And I did.
So how did you end up presenting for MTV? What happened before that? How old were you when you?
Well, I was old, you know, for in comparison for sort of a career start today. I was 27 when I started MTV. But I had studied mathematics and physics at university. And then after university, I'd got this job in this horrendous town called Peterborough in where Andy Bell comes from Malaysia. It's always I can identify who comes from these towns. And who's a nice guy, by the way. And I went to this town. This town was horrendous. And I sold telephone systems, you know, in the days where a telephone system would be a massive piece of equipment, which would have its special room, and you would have you know, an operator and God knows what to work the telephone system of 400 phones in a building. And I didn't sell one because I'm useless at selling. And I spent all my weekends going to London and going to clubs. And I was diving more and more into the subculture in London. And eventually I had to leave this job. I remember when John Lennon died, I was actually in Peterborough, and I bought Walking on Thin Ice, which, you know, which Ono had recorded the night he died, and her wailing on it is very painful. And I played that endlessly in Peterborough, and that sort of summed up my life in Peterborough. I felt like Yoko Ono. I think well, I was actually dying in this town. And so I moved back to my mum's, and then within weeks I moved up to London, and my life completely changed. But basically because I moved into the club culture and hung out with what were then the end of the new romantic era, I would say. And so these were like these really, you know, fashionistas in London who were doing interesting things. And I was sort of on the outside of that, but also dipping into it. And I think from then, it got me into the idea of not being on TV, but doing something in media. And I went on a 3-month journalism course where they said to me immediately, you should be a radio presenter. So obviously they took one look at my face and said, no TV for you. And I did this course and had to start interviewing people, which was fun. I loved interviewing people, and I got hooked on it. And so after that, I worked for various publications, you know, like those free magazines in London, or oh god, there was other things like Blitz. There were like magazines that I got the occasional article in, and also on radio. But basically I would do one thing and no one would want me again. I mean, I was like one of those people who fall upwards. So I failed at something, but just kept going, and every failure was almost used to get the next job. Because you don't tell anyone it's a failure, I suppose. You just go in and say, well, I did work for so-and-so and I have done this. And then you get another job. And I just kept going. And I've got this, I still have it. I have this absolute amazing willpower to achieve something and to do something. And that's still with me. That will never go. And the weird thing is, a friend of mine at that time phoned me up and said, MTV's coming to Europe. And I asked him, what's MTV? I mean, I had no idea. And he told me what it was. And he said, listen, I think you'd be perfect. So I filled in an application. I wrote to them, you know, there's all this specifics you had to send to them. And they interviewed me as a researcher. And when I went to the interview, I had this amazingly baggy trousers with what are they called? You know, those things that hold up your trousers. Yeah, the only reason were the trousers were so old, they'd gone completely out of shape, and I couldn't afford to buy a new pair. So I basically went with these clothes that I wore day and night. And at that point, I was washing up in a restaurant, and they gave me a screen test. And during the screen test, I had to present a minute on pop culture, and I'd taken all these hats, and I had the producer throw a hat at me, and I'd put it on and go, this is A Curiosity Killed the Cat I said, instead of cat. And I flummoxed, but I laughed and I carried on. And in between, they kept filming. In between the takes of doing different things, they filmed. They told us that camera, they said, okay, camera off, but they kept filming. And in between the takes, there was a table in the room, and I would clean the table and dance around it and sing. And I think that's, well, they told me that's why I got the job, because they saw me on camera, which wasn't perfect, obviously, in any way, but they saw my true personality, and they thought I was very eccentric. And as Americans always think that British people are eccentric in any case. And they thought I think they thought I was wildly eccentric, and that's why they gave me the job. So when I started at MTV, I had no experience in front of a camera at all. And I think they had employed me really on the false basis that I'm some sort of nutter.
Are you an improviser? Would you say you're an improviser?
No, it depends. Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at any interview I have to lead, I'm obsessively doing research and obsessively trying to find the right questions. And I want to get something new out of someone and do something. I mean, this is different to back then. Back then, you know, you have to remember MTV, I would interview sometimes 10 people in a day. There's no way I could have done extensive research on any of them. I used to have to, if it was a massive star, I would get a bit more time. But if it was someone who just released a record and were fairly new, then it was going to only be about that record. So you didn't have to do a lot of research. But today, I wouldn't say a complete perfectionist, but I am heading that way, really. I like to challenge myself, and I like things to be good. So, for example, if I present a show, which doesn't happen very often, but if the organization is very disorganized, I can't stand it. You know, I mean, I don't go bananas, but I can't actually stand it. I can't understand why things don't work, because I know what my job is, and I always feel, well, you should know what your job is, and you should do it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
to that extent, yeah, I don't just let things roll. I have to do things well.
I mean, to me, it feels like you're very spontaneous and a storyteller, and you know how to respond even to, you know, not just to words, but to, you know, like my face or whatever, or your, you know, interviews face. And
but I'm so used to doing that.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I mean, I don't remember much, but I was like in my mid-teens when MTV Europe started, I guess. But that was sort of like always the vibe, that there was something that kind of like went beyond the word, you know, like a vibe.
Well, when I came to Germany, and a friend of mine who actually lived opposite me in Cologne at that point, and he called me Valiant Man. He said all his friends used to call me Valiant Man because I was so laid back. But they obviously didn't know me in normal life, because, you know, I'm hardly that at all. But what you say about, you know, it's very important to mirror people in an interview. I know that it's not something that you can do consciously, but, you know, if they're enjoying the interview and they're, you know, they're laughing, you've got to join in. There is ludicrous if you don't, and you'll get much more out of them. And if they're very serious, you know, you're not going to go, oh, otherwise you'd ruin the moment. So basically, I think, yes, I can see what you mean, but I think it's inherent. There are certain things that are inherent in me, but there are certain things that I really need to work on. And certainly information. I mean, you know, today I'm interviewing artists from the past, and a lot of them, I don't know what they've done since their heyday, nor does the audience. But I have to go through and I have to listen to everything they've done, if possible. And I really do a lot of work. So, and I think that's about respect. And I think it's really important. I mean, everyone wants to be respected in some way. You know, you want to feel you have value in the world, don't you? And I think a lot of what I do with the artists is also give them value, but I mean it. You know what I mean? At the end of the interview, I will often say something which is heartfelt and it's meant. And it's sometimes, you know, sometimes I have to think about it when the end of the interview is coming. I don't work that out before, but when the interview is coming, I'm thinking about, what do I want to say to this person? What do they mean to me? What do I feel is the right thing to say that I believe in? And, you know, I mean, I have had an occasion where nothing came up because it didn't feel right. So I just said, thank you. And that was it. But nearly always I will find something that I like about people, because I think it doesn't have to be their work. It can be them, their personality, their achievements, how they impacted your life in some way. And I think so much of what these people produce has impacted my life that for me, that's quite easy. And it's great to leave someone with value.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very important in any kind of communication that, you know, you kind of like have a positive beginning and a positive ending to the exchange. And
yeah, okay. I don't know about any kind. I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know.
Well,
In the supermarket, you look fat, fuck off.
You look.
No, I mean,
that's amazing.
I don't think it needs always to be positive. It can also be earthy and truthful in the most hard way.
Yes, yes,
dear.
yes. Hey, let me ask you about, like, you studied mathematics?
Yeah, I know. How weird. Actually, that's a weird one as well, because I went to a grammar school in England, which was, you know, the top 2% of the population went to a grammar school. You had to do, you know, and at that period, only the top 3% went to university. So almost everyone who went to grammar school went to university. But no one in my family had ever been to university. I mean, no one had higher education at all. And so for me, it was a really odd idea to go to university. And then when it came up, I copied the form of another guy in my class whose name is Roger Howe. And I copied his form completely. Everything. I mean, absolutely everything. And we both got an interview at Exeter University. And just prior to the interview, they, you know, talked to all of us who were there. And then they said, well, there are two of you here who have got exactly the same application form, exactly the same interests. I even copied his interests. I mean, nothing changed. It's absolutely exactly, and want to study the same subject. And we both got in, which is really weird. So that's how I ended up studying maths and physics. And I think university, certainly for me in that period of my life, was about growing up and seeing the world. Probably is similar today, although I think young people grow up a bit quicker. And I think at that period, it was about being away from home. I mean, and Exeter was a long, you know, 5 hours in the car from my mum's, which was another important factor to have your own life away from your family, to have a life with people of your same age, and to have that development process. You know, I mean, I went to university and I came out almost immediately. Well, I think I must have been 17, 18 when I came out. And this was like 1978, 1979. So this is a completely different era. And my whole life changed. My interests changed. My social spheres changed. Everything changed at university. And I think, you know, those years were so important and impactful for me. And it wasn't about mathematics and physics. I was absolutely brilliant at mathematics and I was terrible at physics. And when I left, I had never had any intention in the world of ever doing anything with it. But I think in that period, and I think it's the same in Britain today, I do think it's a slight difference in Germany, but same in Britain today, that a university degree means you've got a university degree. It doesn't really mean that you have to go down the exact path of what you've done at university. Whereas I think in Germany, it's more structured in a way you make a decision early on and you move, you can change, but you move down a certain, often move down a certain path for most of your life. In Britain, that was very different. So when I came out of university with a maths and physics degree, I don't think I just had a degree, you know, I didn't really talk about it in that way. And it wasn't really of interest. I mean, it did appeal. I remember it came up in the interview with MTV because I think it probably seemed a bit odd that someone with a maths and physics degree was wanting to be on MTV. So, and I think that oddity part of it also played into that equation. But, you know, can I do maths and physics today? I have no idea at all. I mean, that's gone. That's been blasted out by the Omen and Dorian Gray long ago.
Yeah, but I find that like the things that I learned at uni, they are kind of like with me as sort of
well, mathematics
a
is very logical.
frame of mind, you know, like
Yeah.
somehow some of that what I learned.
Well, I'm a very creative person, but I'm very structured, and that's mathematics. I really believe that's what mathematics gave me, some sort of structure in my life. And I think maybe that is what I've kept from it. Everything else has fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, it's so this discussion about fame, right? So from your experience, so what happens to people when they lose it?
Well, I think what happens to most, and it's also most pop stars, is that they believe that all their problems, and I think this was me as well, I think it's a subconscious thing, but I think looking back, this is what I'm saying, that all your problems will be resolved by being famous. I mean, when you, on a simplistic childlike level, people who are famous are smiling, happy, wealthy, and shaggy. You know what I mean? It's like they are, and they're just getting everything you want when you're a teenager. Do you know what I mean? It's like they are the epitome of success in every area. And the truth is, you go in with this emotional baggage that you haven't resolved, and you're then famous with this emotional baggage. So actually that emotional baggage you have is then in the spotlight and you still haven't resolved it. So it's actually worse. And I think that's the problem. It compounds all the problems that you had before that you haven't resolved. It compounds them, and it doesn't make it easier. It makes it harder.
Totally. You know, one of the scenes that I thought were like extremely sad was like comedians. Like when you know, I haven't watched mainstream TV in 25 years, but I remember in the late 90s when you had all those comedy shows in German TV and RTL or whatever, and there were like these people that were playing the happy, successful, witty kind of person. But I knew and I felt that maybe those are like the kind of like most depressed, sad people, badly paid. They get a buyout, and their stuff runs on, you know, all other networks like for the next 30 years or something like that. I was feeling so bad for that side of fame. What I'm trying to say is that when it comes to the system, it's not just the person getting famous, but it's also, it used to be and still is, the industry that is feeding this, or that is creating this path that makes those people ill, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's an abuse. I think it's more abusive today. I mean, the music industry was definitely massively abusive. I think that is changing a bit. I think in the music industry, it's changed a bit. For me, I think television has, and in certain aspects, is still abusive. I mean, I don't watch mainstream TV either, not because of that. It's because it just doesn't interest me anymore. And you know, I don't know, people talk about certain shows and I have no idea what's going on, but I think, you know, nor do all my friends. You know, no one really watches TV in that way, and I don't think it's made for people like me in any case. But yeah, I see what you mean. I think certainly comedians, because they used to present such a positive image, like you said, that there was something dark behind it. But you know, I do think that, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about is the drive for success. And the drive from success comes from childhood wounds.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And so I look back, and this might sound really weird, but I've done so much therapy that I can speak completely openly about it. And for me, it's not shocking, but for other people, it's sometimes really shocking. My father tried to kill my mother when she was pregnant with me. He was having an affair. She hid in the back of his car. He got her out, and then he drove the car against her against the wall, but he missed. And I mean, that's the story of his life, really, missing everything. And anyhow, so he didn't want to have a third child. I was the third son. He didn't want to have a third child. And I think, I don't know for sure, but I think my mother wanted to get pregnant to keep him. You know, my mother was from the, she was born in 24, so she's like the ones that experienced the war, and had much more of a mentality that when you get married, it is for life, and that don't matter how unhappy you are, you're unhappy for life. And my father had nothing to do with me when I was young, or very little. And I only have my first memory, and I find this a bit tragic, really, but my only first memory that I have, and I know there are other events in there because I've seen photos of other ages, but my first memory is when I was 10 or 11, I worked for my father on a market stall. So he sold stuff on a market stall. He was basically, his best friend, Dave the Thief, was a criminal and used to steal things. And my father was the fence in English, which means that's the person who sold it. So I come from sort of a very low-level criminal family in my father's side. And anyhow, so during the day, you know, I would help him sell things, and then in the evening we'd pack the lorry. And then he said to me, I won't be long, I'm just going to go to the toilet, to a public toilet, which was behind these shops. And we're about 30 miles away from home. So I waited in the cab, and I waited 10, 15 minutes. And like any child, I suddenly thought I need to go to the loo. So I locked up the cab and I went to go to find the toilet. And in the car park was my father, which I know today, but at that point I couldn't understand what they were doing. But he was having sex with this woman in a car outside the public toilet. So I remember turning back and bolting back. And when I didn't speak to him for a week. And when I got home, I sat on the sofa for a week. And this isn't, I'm not exaggerating. I literally refused to get off the sofa. And my mum had no idea and didn't know what to do with me. And of course, I couldn't tell my mum because I was, you know, a 10 or 11-year-old, and I would be breaking my mother's heart by saying that I saw my father with another woman. And of course, my father didn't speak up, you know, so he's not going to admit to it either. So that first memory is quite a torturous memory. And I think those factors were the driving force for me, feeling that I wasn't loved from my father, were the driving force for me to eventually end up on TV. Now, I'm not saying that everybody on TV has a similar experience, but I am saying that there will be something in their background which has provided the drive in their life to become famous, because there is a reason why you want that. I mean, I did write a book on pop stars and the drives, the deep wounds in their life and what gave them the drive to be successful. And that was all the major pop stars that I've interviewed. But I do think it applies to everyone. And everyone I've ever met and known well has got a deep, that's well known, has got a deep emotional wound in their childhood. And at one point, you have to deal with it. If you don't deal with it, you're never going to move on from it. It doesn't mean, you know, like, I mean, Germany has a weird relationship with therapy, because in Germany, you know, if you go to therapy, people think you're ill. But I think if you go to therapy, you're actually probably more advanced,
Yes.
because you understand yourself. And I think that actually everyone can have a benefit from therapy. And for me, it's, you know, over the years, it's been an amazing, and I hate that word journey, but it is a sort of journey of self-discovery, and also about acceptance. You know, now I look back and I say, yeah, you know, a lot of men are shits. You know, I can be a shit sometimes in a relationship. And, you know, and I look back and I see it slightly differently. And I do feel that my father did love me in some way. But I've got these highlighted events that have covered that in some way. So I've sort of, in a lot of ways, I've made peace with my past on to that extent. And I think those things are really important in life. And I don't know. I mean, I looked after my mother until her death, which was about 5 years ago, and I became the main carer and spent, well, it was 10 years of going backwards and forwards, but the last 3 years almost permanently, when she got lung cancer. And my relationship with her was so perfect by the end, because we actually talked about everything. And I mean absolutely everything. And it was an amazing experience. And at the end, the night before she died, she gave this sort of long speech about what she wanted for me, for my life. I'd got a hospital bed in the front room, in her front room, and my bed next to hers for the last 2 weeks. And it was really tough. I mean, I can't tell you how tough that is, but people know it. And anyhow, she told me what she wanted for my life. And her first sentence was, and this is a 93-year-old, she said, I want you to meet a man who is as kind to you as you have been to me. And then she started talking about, from a future perspective, what my life was going to be. And it was the most amazing thing that I've ever experienced. And it was a gift, you know, and I think it was probably the most wonderful gift I will ever have in my life. And although 5 years on, I have moved on, you know, in to the extent, you know, my mother said to me right at the end, she went, and now I want you to forget about me, never think about me, and go on with your own life, which of course at that time was the most painful thing to hear. But 5 years down the line, I visited her grave about a few weeks ago, and I said goodbye, and that's it. I won't go back there. That is it. I have pictures of her with me on the wall. But for me, that part of my life is over. It's not that I'm going to forget my mum, but it's I'm not going to wallow or try and go into that area. But what she left with me was the most positive feeling that you can ever have. And I think the most positive thing a parent can give a child, which is a vision that will always stay with them. And if I ever feel down, that comes up and it's like, oh, wow, I'm going to be fine. It's quite a weird thing. So I have this, you know, weird relationship with my parents, but my mum rectified also the relationship with my father in a lot of ways, because I learned about my father from her, and I learned so much about their relationship. And it takes two to tango. You know, my mum wasn't an easy person to live with either. You know, it's always like that in a relationship, you know, like we always blame the other person, but we're also part of the reason when things don't work out.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. And were your brothers there?
Yeah, they were there on the last days. I don't have a particularly close relationship with my brothers, but yes, they were there in the last days, and they had a different relationship to my mum as well. And I know that I told them the day after that mum was obviously going to die that day, because she'd said her goodbyes. And I said to them, you know, if you want to say anything to her, you should go in now, because she's conscious at the moment, but she actually did go unconscious. So she's conscious at the moment. And if you want to communicate with her, you've got to do it now. And they both went in and they came out into the kitchen hope they don't hear this. They won't like it. Anyhow, they came out into the kitchen and I said to them, so what did she say? And they both said, she said, look after Steve. Because but I actually was very pleased because I committed myself to look after her, and they didn't do a lot. And they will admit that, and I did so much, I did everything. And the thing is, in the end, if she'd said the same to them as she said to me, it would have been meaningless then. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, I was happy because I felt like, okay, that means that what she said to me, and people don't lie at the end of their life. I mean, I had a similar, the weird thing is, and I didn't believe my father. I visited my father. He was in hospital and he was on his deathbed. He died a week later than when I last saw him. And I said to him, Dad, I love you. And it was the weirdest experience ever because I realized I couldn't remember that I'd ever said that. Obviously, when I was a child, I did, I'm sure. But I said, Dad, I love you. And he said, I love you too. I always have. And it was a big moment for me. But a day later, I thought, pile of shit. I brushed it off because I thought, yeah, sure. But you didn't do anything, did you? You didn't really make any effort. And you know how, I mean, in a certain way, that is true. You need to make effort to show things to people. You can't just say words. But on someone's deathbed, I don't believe they lie, because at that moment of death, there is no reason to say anything but the truth. There really isn't. And now I realize that he meant it. So it's a a different journey since those times.
And so you think you have sort of completed the grieving over your mother? And
oh yeah, well, Dad didn't take long. To be honest, I didn't know him. You know what I mean? I know this sounds really weird, but even when my mum phoned me up and said, your dad's dying, he's got lung cancer, I really felt like she'd told me that the neighbor down the street is dying. It sort of didn't hit me at all. But with Mum, it was very, very painful. And the first year, I sort of lost it in the first year or year and a half, completely. I mean, I was in a complete state, to be honest. And people do not understand you. You know what I mean? It's very difficult for people who haven't experienced a very, very close relationship and the loss of someone, how that grief can affect you so massively for such a long, well, I say a long period, but 1 or 2 years is for everyone, I think. But it affected me really, really dramatically. And then I eventually came out of it, and now I feel that it is just part of my life that I put aside. And it's a little bit like MTV. It's an era that is gone. And I don't disrespect it in any way, but it's an era that ended a long time ago. And I'm okay with it. And I'm proud of certain things that I achieved, back then. But at the same time, Steve Blame isn't Steve Blame today. I feel it's a completely different person.
Yeah. So what happened between, say, like 97 and 2005 or something? Like, so 2005, you said you did the screenwriting course or whatever it was, right?
Yeah. That was the big hole, because I came to Germany to work for Viva. And I won't talk too much about that because I had a horrible time. And after Viva, when I was fired and I was paid off, the first thing I did was spend 200,000 on partying in 6 months, 200,000 Deutschmarks at that time, going absolutely apeshit. But I think for me, it was dirty money. I mean, I hated that period of my life, and it was a very awful period of my life, I feel. And certain things happened to me. And the reason I don't want to talk about it is things happened to me that would get me into huge legal problems, because it would be accusations against people. So I can't, and I don't want to talk about it without saying those things. So for me, I feel like I don't want to talk about, oh yeah, I interviewed so-and-so and that was lovely, when actually some absolutely horrendous things went on. 8 pages of my biography were taken out by the lawyer. And so I can't go there. You know, there's no point going there, and it's gone. It's in the past. And but when I left Viva, or you know, when it was over, and I lost my house in London, I blew all this money, and I think, in essence, and I've never been an addict, but like an addict, I needed to hit the ground completely before I could stand up again. And I look back upon that period. I mean, it's a very dark period. I look back upon that period. There were, you know, nice parts in it as well, but it was a dark period where I was battling my demons so much, and I'd lost my self-worth completely. It'd been ripped apart, and I felt I had no value at all. And I remember that at that period, obviously, I was still well known. So I'd walk down the street, and of course, I'd be Mr. MTV in some way. But for me, it was like, I don't want to be that, you know. I don't want to be remembered for this, because it's something I'm not anymore. But I wasn't over it, and it was painful. That whole period was very, very painful. But, and this is the weirdest thing, I always thought that would be like a black hole in my life. I would never, ever get anything out of. And because I've become a writer, a screenwriter, I have so much fodder from the darkest period in my life and going into that period, that I now look back and go, oh, it was the best period of my life. That was fantastic. And it was, you know, it's sort of nuts, but it's where I get everything from, you know, because I've had experiences that not many people have had. You know, I've had experiences of fame, you know, on a certain level, but I've had experience of being, you know, successful, of being, you know, a TV presenter and being recognizable all around Europe. I've had the experiences of interviewing incredibly famous people and heroes, and sometimes irritating people. But basically, I've had experience of interviewing people that people don't get a chance to meet or interview. And I've had a very dark period where the carpet was pulled from under my legs, and I was on the ground, and I had felt like I had no hope. And a period, a not very long period, but a period where I really did contemplate suicide. And it's a very dark period, but it's a period I look back on, and as I said, now I just think, oh yeah, that's, you know, like, fictionalize it in some way and change it in some way, but that is the root of something that I'm writing. And you know, there's a lot of that period in something that I've written that no one's taken up yet, but it's really quite entertaining, and it's the dark side of fame. And I don't think many people can write that, because there's not many people who have experienced it. So for me, you know, that period was a really valuable period. And then my father died, and I mean, I had no money for years. For 10 years, I had nothing. I lived on nothing. I mean, it's really horrendous in that way. And literally, friends would feed me, you know. I'd got myself into such a state, and also a state of inaction, you know, where I found it really difficult to get myself together to do anything. And then after my father died, I mean, it's a very small amount that I got. He was also broke, so I got like £3,000. But I used that £3,000 to get to university again, and that restarted my life. And at university, I mean, you know, the kindness of strangers. You know, people talk about this idea that sometimes, you know, people you don't know can be so kind to you and offer you an olive branch or offer you something which gets you to the next stage of your life. There are kind people out there. And at university, this guy, Charles, who was the oldest person on the course, I was 46 back then and he was 56. Every day at university, he used to say to me, okay, we're going to the bar. And we go to the bar and he'd get me a glass of wine, and a sandwich. And if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have eaten. And he used to say, don't say anything. I don't want any thanks. I will do it every day. Don't say anything. And it was such a, and he's not a wealthy man. Do you know what I mean? Okay, I mean, a wine and a sandwich don't cost much, but people don't do that. And it was such a kind gesture. And my aunt, who was alive at that time, she would give me 25 quid a week. And that would pay for my train fare to Norwich and back from where I was at that period. And actually what I did is I would hide in the toilet, which is an old trick in England. If you hide in the toilet and lock the toilet door, and then I wouldn't pay the fare. I mean, I was a 46-year-old man who couldn't pay the fare, but it was like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go to university. I'm gonna do this. I didn't pay for my halls of residence. I didn't pay for the course. It took me 5 years after that to pay it back. But it was the best thing I ever did, because it again opened my world up again, and it gave me the confidence again to say, okay, now this is a new phase of my life and I can move on again. I think it's fascinating how those stages come up and you feel blocked and you feel like your life isn't going to change, and then suddenly the smallest trigger changes it.
It seems to me like there are a lot of interlocking stories going on there also, with, like you're saying, like the death of your father giving you that money to then decide to go do that course and things like that. And when did the thought of psychotherapy came to you?
I went to, well, the first psychotherapist I went to was in when I was 28. So I hadn't been at MTV very long, but I don't think she was very good. And so, I mean, I've been to a lot since then. But I've also had, in the last 2.5 years, I've had trauma therapy, which has been, to be honest, the best experience I've ever had in my life. It's been amazing. And the weird thing is that I don't know, it's not just about dealing with the demons. I've gone through everything in my life. I knew exactly what had gone on in my life. I knew all the facts and everything, but I don't think I'd got to the point of acceptance and where I could move on with all of it. And this trauma therapy has really done that. And it's done even more than that, because I feel it's changed my whole attitude of my future, of what I can achieve and what I can get out of my life, and made me into a more forward-looking person. And it's changing, this sounds weird, but it's changed me physically. Since I started that therapy, I did karate for 9 months, but I fell in love with the karate trainer, so that ended. Although we're best friends now. So, and but I'm not going back. And I've started boxing. I go to boxing once or twice a week, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And my body has changed again. This shirt, the only reason I'm wearing this shirt is that this morning I looked at that shirt. 15 years ago, a friend of mine bought this for me for my birthday, and I've never been able to wear it. And today I got into it. So that shows you how much my body is changing. And I haven't, I mean, I've realized it, and people tell me that I'm looking, better, because I'm definitely thinner than I was, and physically stronger. And it's just that this therapy has changed my whole perspective. And instead of winding down, I'm 64, but I feel, it's weird to say, I know physically I'm not, but I feel like I'm in my 30s with the power of someone in their 30s, looking forward to their life from that perspective and enjoying everything I do. I only do things I want to do. I mean, that makes me a little bit difficult sometimes, because I just decide, okay, I love writing and it fulfills me, and I do that. I love interviewing people. It fulfills me and do that. And you know, I'm a little bit difficult when it comes to being interviewed because I don't really want to turn up, but then I enjoy it, so it's okay. But it's, you know, I don't do anything that I don't want to do, and I enjoy everything that I do. And that for me is an amazing life to be in. And no, obviously I'm not wealthy. Obviously, you know, I have issues about, you know, how, like, paying the rent or how to live. I mean, not at the moment, but it's like, it's not like I'm okay for life. Do you know what I mean? I'm not set up in that sense. But to be honest, I'd rather be in my position than be wealthy in a position where you're unhappy and you don't really have a perspective and you don't do anything you want to do. I do everything I want to do.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Is there any, have you ever, I mean, I know this word artist, right, is kind of like is a difficult one, or even art, you know, it's very difficult. But have you ever considered yourself as following the path of an artist? Is that what you're doing maybe nowadays?
Oh, I think I always was, you know, I always was. And I think certainly after my time at Viva, I think that was the realization for me, was that on one side, I had this freedom to try and be creative and do what I wanted to do, but I didn't have the talent or the know-how how to get there. I'd always worked in a structure, you know, and the MTV structure worked for me and the Viva structure didn't work for me. So if I was supported by a structure, I could be successful. And so for me, it was about finding a route through in terms of finding something I wanted to do. And this was, you know, and to do that in midlife is a very different thing to do it when you're 20. So yeah, I am in essence an artist because I have that sort of life, and certainly a screenwriter, you know, I mean, it is an art. It's I think interviewing is an art. I don't think, you know, not everyone can interview. You know, you see so many bad interviews. And I think there is a certain talent involved in getting information out of people and opening them up and making it work. And you know that as well as I know that. And so that is a skill and a talent. And you're an artist because of your music and performing, and you know what that gives you, and you know why you do it. You know, there is something not just therapeutic, but especially in writing, you're dealing all the time with working through your demons until you actually get to know and get to like your demons, which is really interesting. And I think any true artist is dealing with that side to themselves. And if they're not, I'm not sure what they're actually achieving is art.
For me, really, if you're interested in this, it's very much about like if I were to stop what I'm doing, I'm wondering who else is going to do it, and there's nobody else who's going to do this. So that's why I feel a responsibility to sort of like follow my path or vision, for lack of a better word, you know.
Well, also you've actually said it without saying it there. You're doing it for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you don't create something for someone else. It might be, the goal might be, this is going to be really successful and I'm going to earn money out of it and whatever. But actually, you can't think like that to achieve something. You have to do it because it's about you and it's about something within you that needs to be expressed. And if you can hone in on that, I think then you're making something that is truly of value. And that's why there's such a lot of good and bad stuff out there. You know, there's bad stuff out there as well, because people are looking at a formula. They're looking at creating something. They're thinking, you know, these writing teams. I know someone who's in a writing team and she's very talented, but I always feel that a writing team is sitting there with a brief. So write a piece of music for X big pop star that fits what she or he does, to release on their new album. And so even from that premise, you've taken away the art from what you're doing. And this is really difficult for me, because that's why at the moment I'm mainly pitching my stuff to America, because I write a TV pilot or a screenplay, a film screenplay, a feature, first, because I have to own it in the sense that it has to come from here and it has to be all mine, and I really have to understand it inside and out. And in Germany, if you go to a German company, they basically want to work with the seed of an idea and accompany you, which means that they want to tell you what their vision is. But I just want to do my vision because that's important to me. If I could work by someone giving me that brief and saying, okay, actor X wants a vehicle for this, this, and this, and then, and we're looking at an action film with that, this and this happens, I couldn't do it because it's already taken away what I get out of it. It has to come from within me. And I think there are some people that can work like that, and good on them, because they earn regular money, and there's some people that can't, and that's just the way it is. You can't change your inner core. It's just how you are.
But from my experience, a lot of people do neglect their inner core, and sort of like the cliche of the midlife crisis being about, like, having a new partner or a big car or whatever. I think in the end, it really is about what we're talking about people sort of discovering their creativity in some way,
Well, I think, I think what you said is also something about life, that if you don't, when I went to the therapist this time, she said to me, why are you here? This is the classic question that a therapist will ask you immediately. And I said, because I want the rest of my life to be happy and fulfilled. And if I meet the right partner with the right partner, and that's what I want. And she said, oh my God, that's brilliant. And the thing is, I think if you deal with your life as you're going along, if you don't, all these problems, all these wounds and problems from your past, and this fits in with what you said about creativity and where it must come from, your inner core. And if you don't deal with all those things, it's going to come back to hit you in later life. You're going to have all these problems later in life. It's all going to come up. But I tell you, it's going to come up for everyone watching, but I'm going to die happy. No, everyone's going to die happy. We're all going to die at the same fucking time, probably.
Hey, this sounds like a happy ending.
Exactly, yeah. like Sean Dixon, Hi-Fi Sean. I love that album. Hi-Fi Sean and David McAlmont. I don't know. Do you remember that track, Yes, from Bernard Butler and David McAlmont in the 90s? Most beautiful track, and he's got the most beautiful voice. And these two guys hooked up to make an album, and it's called Happy Ending. And I said, so have you had your happy ending? He's laughing. He said, when we named it, we didn't realize that there was another version to the happy ending.
Really?
I'll tell you what a happy ending is. Okay, I'm going to leave you with one story then, because it says it's come to the end. Boxing. Now, I absolutely adore boxing, but boxing, oh God, can I go boxing after I say this? Boxing is like a gay porno movie without a happy ending, because after 10 minutes, the trainer whips his top off. All these young guys take their top off, and there's me punching the bag, Ooh. and I just feel like, well, where have I landed? It's just very weird. Maybe that's completely tasteless story there. But
No,
anyhow, that's a happy ending.
it's just happy, but no ending. You know, that's
Exactly.
Hey, thank you so much, Steve. I think this was
Yeah.
just so incredibly like self-contained and like we've come full circle. And I guess we
No, it
could
was
talk
great
much
to talk
longer,
to
but
you.
this wonderful. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
but I think after there's nothing that comes after a happy ending, is there?
Well,
Asleep.
What's the word? Refractory period or something, or whatever it's
Yeah,
called.
okay. I don't think we should go there. All right.
No, very, very nice to meet you. And
Yeah, and you, and thanks.
yeah, yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay. Where do
So
we go
yeah,
from here?
I don't
I'll
know.
just stop the recording for now.
Yeah, okay.